stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
1-833-288-EWTN.
I don't understand why I have to earn salvation.
1-833-288-3986.
What's stopping?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome again to Call to Communion. This program is just for you if you are a non-Catholic. There's nothing else like it on the radio dial. A program just for non-Catholics. Now, how does that work? Well, if you are a non-Catholic, maybe you were a Catholic as a kid, fell away from the faith for whatever reason, maybe you're one of those CEOs, Christmas and Easter only. Well, if you're a CEO and you've got questions about the Catholic faith, this could be the place to get those questions answered. Give us a call, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening outside of North America, you'll want to dial 1 and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Again, the phone number 833-288-EWTN. Michael Birchfield is our producer. And we also have Ryan Penny, who is answering the phones for us, doing a super job on that. Jeff Burson, our social media guru, and he will pass along any questions that you may pose via Facebook or YouTube. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
I'm good. Doing better than you because you had a lunch incident.
Oh, yeah. Finishing my substantial lunch, I got to my very last of 2 plums and ate the first half and then pulled the stone out of the middle and then reckoned with one of God's little creatures who was enjoying the plum with me. I'm just glad that I ate the half that I ate.
Yeah.
And not the other half, because then I wouldn't have known. I would have eaten the whole plum, right? And I would currently be enjoying one of God's little creatures.
Well, you know what they say about what's worse than finding a worm?
Not finding one.
Finding half a worm.
Right, exactly.
You don't want to do that. Here is a quick email that we're going to pass along here before we get to the phones. This is from John, who says, where in 1 Corinthians 3, verses 11 through 15, where there is there any mention of punishment or cleansing that supports the idea of purgatory?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. If you have listened to this show for any length of time and heard me answer questions about purgatory in the past, you will note that I do not point to 1 Corinthians 3 as evidence for the doctrine of purgatory. I understand that that is a tried and true and familiar passage to Catholics and that it has been bandied about in Catholic apologetics for a long time. I think that there are better arguments in favor of purgatory. I do not believe that the context of 1 Corinthians 3, this is my own personal reading of the text, I think the literal sense of the text has nothing to do with purgatory and has to do with the merit of apostles who build churches on shaky ground so that the work of the apostolate falls apart, but the apostle who does the work is himself saved, as though through fire, because when persecution and trial comes, the thing that he's built falls apart.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's the literal sense of the text. I don't think it has anything immediately to do with the question of purgatory.
Okay.
On the other hand, the scriptures can legitimately be read in an allegorical manner. And so it's not without some kind of reason that the fathers of the church could read this, if not a literal description of purgatory, as a kind of allegory. For, well, that's, what the apostolic workers were experiencing in their ministry is similar to what we will experience in our own lives. If we go about our life and we don't build on a solid foundation, we might be saved, but as through fire. All right. But I agree with the tenor of the question. Yeah, if the literal sense of the text, in context, it's not a text about purgatory. There are better arguments for purgatory in sacred scripture.
Okay, very good. By the way, you're always talking about allegories. Do you know who invented the allegory?
I can tell from the look on your face. I better get the drum set ready.
Al Gore.
Ching, ching.
Okay. Here's one from Jacob. He texted us yesterday. Would you please explain the Catholic perspective on Ouija boards or Ouija boards?
Yes, thank you. Appreciate it. So the Ouija board is a form of divination. It's an attempt to communicate with disembodied spirits.
Right.
As such, it falls under multiple prohibitions, and especially the First Commandment, which forbids any kind of necromancy or superstitious practice. And of course, recourse to spirits and mediums or of any kind is explicitly ruled out in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Exorcists will tell us that this kind of practice is the best way to invite trouble with the demonic into your life, which is something that nobody needs. So it's a grave sin. It's enormously spiritually dangerous. It's a form of superstition. And if you've got one anywhere near your person, you should throw it into the trash heap, into the incinerator. And wouldn't be remiss to have a priest come over to bless your house and maybe even an exorcism of the property. So anyway, run in the other direction.
Yeah, get it out of there.
I'm going to tell an anecdote.
All right.
When I was in high school, there were a bunch of girls in my high school that got into this kind of thing. And I wasn't Catholic at the time, but I had better sense to get involved. And they were always trying to entice me to be involved in this. And I wasn't a particularly pious person. But I remember I pulled one of them aside one time and I said, so you're talking to this disembodied spirit, named whatever. She said, yes. I said, let me ask you a question. If you were walking down a dark alley at night and somebody sticks his head out of the dark alley and goes, psst, psst, little girl, come here, I got something to tell you. Would you go? Well, of course not. So why, when the voice comes out of a cardboard square, is it somehow credible?
Yeah.
That doesn't make walking around sense. You don't trust disembodied voices floating out of dark alleys. Why would you trust them floating out of cardboard boxes? Even apart from the question of the prohibition of the church, just doesn't make walking around sense.
Sure. Okay. We'll also get into another question here that we received from Kate, checking us out on YouTube, and probably won't have time to answer this fully, and if not, we'll carry it over to the other side of the break. What exactly was the mark of Cain, and what was the curse of Ham? Do we know
Right, sure. Cain was marked in a way. We don't know how he was marked. He was identified somehow by God by way of punishment. And no, I'm sorry. He was exiled, all right, by God by way of punishment.
Right.
But he was marked in such a fashion that people would know not to persecute him or drive him out or kill him.
Okay.
All right. Let me come back on Ham.
Got it. We'll talk about the curse of Ham and lots more. When we come back, we'll also talk with Maria in Houston, Mark in Syracuse, and there's a line open for you now, 833-288-EWTN. Hey, tonight on Catholic Answers Live, it is 2 hours of Q&A open forum with our friend Cy Kellett. Do check it out tonight, 6 p.m. Eastern, here on EWTN Radio. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Mark in Syracuse, listening on the Real Presence Radio app. He is in Sioux Falls. Hey there, Mark. What's on your mind today?
Well, I've been listening to Call to Communion, and I feel like I'm growing in my faith, and I'm at that inquiry level of understanding the Catholic faith. But as a Protestant, I'm a Mason. My grandfather was a Mason. My uncle has been a Mason. And, I've gone up through the Scottish Rite, 32nd degree Mason. But I'm finding out that the Mason and the Church are not together. So if I were to ever become Catholic, am I going to have to denounce my affiliation with the Masonic Lodge?
Thank you. I appreciate the question. I'm sensitive to the difficulty that you're faced with because this has been a part of your family and your experience, and presumably your experiences in the Masonic Lodge have been nothing but positive, and you have good thoughts about it. And so that's difficult. The origins of Freemasonry philosophically are grounded in the deism of the 18th century Enlightenment, and its origins were intentionally and explicitly anti-Catholic, and the aim of Masonry to enter into dialogue with the civil order and to have an impact in popular culture or in culture at the level of government or social work was specifically to counter the influence of the Catholic Church in civil society. That's why it's no accident that if you look at where Masonic lodges are placed geographically in the world, they are often built in close proximity to places of Catholic education, formation, or worship. I know I live in Alabama. The metropolitan see of my part of the country is the Archdiocese of Mobile, is a beautiful Catholic cathedral in Mobile. And just a block or two down the road, there's a rather large Masonic lodge. That's not an accident. If you go to St. Louis, Missouri, which is home is a big Catholic city, and you've got St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit-run university, about a block away from Jesuit Hall, which is just packed full of all these Jesuits who live there. You've got a giant Masonic lodge. It's not an accident. It's not an accident that those things are in close proximity. And as you know from having gone through the rites of Freemasonry, there is an expressed avowal of indifferentism, right, in Freemasonry. So Freemasons are required to believe in God, but they are indifferent as to which God you believe in or to what denomination or religion you believe in, and they're very articulate about that. That actually is undergirded by the error, the religious error of indifferentism, namely that it doesn't matter what church or denomination or religious community you belong to, provided you believe in God, kind of loosely defined, i.e. the deistic God. So in its philosophical origins and its social agenda, and in its opposition to the Catholic Church, you can understand why the Catholic Church itself would have always taken a dim view of Freemasonry. Now, your experience of Freemasonry is probably relatively benign. You probably cooked some barbecue and done some fundraisers for handicapped kids or whatever, and you haven't seen anything overtly anti-Catholic perhaps in your experience. That's not always been the case with Freemasonry, and it's not currently the case always with Freemasons in other parts of the world. There are other countries where the anti-Catholicism, the anti-clericalism is much more pronounced and vociferous and pernicious. Yeah, sure. And even if your particular lodge is a bunch of good old boys that just like having a nice time, you're still supporting an organization that at its headwaters is intentionally anti-Catholic. And I'm stretching the analogy here. I mean, obviously I'm not trying to compare the two, but imagine a really pernicious, I'll leave it up to your imagination so I won't be too inflammatory. Imagine a really pernicious political party, none currently existing in the United States, who had, totalitarian or tyrannical aims by targeting, particular groups of people, economic classes, minorities, you name it. Mm-hmm. And it was just shot through philosophically wrong. And your attitude was, yeah, but my chapter is a bunch of nice guys. That's kind of a weak analogy to the situation that you're faced with. So the answer to your question is yes, if you become Catholic, you're not going to be participating as a Freemason. That'll cost you emotionally, may cost relationships. Mm-hmm. When I became Catholic, I lost relationships. I had friends that stopped talking to me because I became Catholic. Lost those friends. I'm sorry I lost them. I didn't choose to cut them off. Yeah. They cut me off, Jesus says that if we prefer our mother, our father, our wife, our children, our very lives to the kingdom of God, we're not worthy to follow him. So it is, and it's inevitable that to become Catholic will cost us something. It's going to cost different people different things. But if we don't take up our cross and follow Christ, we can't be his disciples. To become a Catholic is to embrace the way of the cross.
Yeah, absolutely.
But with the conviction, the belief, the faith that even in the midst of our sufferings and our deprivations, we're going to attain God.
Mark, is that helpful for you?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
You are
Thank
most welcome. Thank you. And that opens up a line for you now, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. I got a little bit anxious there and just went on after the break and did not come back and answer that question from Kate, who wanted to know what was the curse of Ham.
Sure. Well, in the book of Genesis, after Noah and his sons emerge from the ark, Noah builds a vineyard and he drinks wine and he gets blotto, and his son Canaan comes in, and we understand that he uncovers his father's nakedness. Now, we don't know necessarily what that entailed, but he exposed Noah to some kind of indignity, and different interpreters have a different understanding of what that was involved in. But when Noah comes to his senses, he realizes that he's been violated in some way by his son Canaan, and so he curses Canaan and Canaan's ancestor, his progeny, Ham. Now, the text itself leaves it at that. Cursed be Canaan, the lowest of slaves, he'll be the servant to his brother. All right. Now, obviously the Israelites understood themselves to be Shemites, descendants of Shem, and the Canaanites that they subjugated in the Promised Land to be descendants of Canaan. So there may be, just at the historical level, some kind of ideological explanation for justifying the subjugation of the land of Canaan. But I think we're better to read this in an allegorical vein, like St. Paul does all the Old Testament narratives. He says that Abraham, for example, the two wives of Abraham, Sarah and Hagar, represent Israel according to the flesh and Israel according to the spirit. I think that we can read this text allegorically. The spiritual Shemites are those who are participants in the city of God, whether they're Jews or Gentiles. The Canaanites, those who, the Canaanites in spirit, if you will, who are alienated from the city of God. And the two cities, St. Augustine tells us, coexist down through the centuries. Those who are seeking God and Lord's will and try to deny their flesh and give up idolatry and their attachment to creatures, and those that love God above all things and the neighbor as themselves. And ultimately, it will be those citizens of the city of God that will be vindicated.
There you go, Kate. Thank you so much for your text. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Maria called us yesterday from Houston. Couldn't get her on, and so we're putting her on the air right now. Maria, thank you for holding. What's your question today?
Hi, hello to both of you, and thank you, Dr. Anders, for all that you do. My question had to do with our Blessed Mother, and what is John Calvin's and Martin Luther's position on her?
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it. So, both Luther and Calvin rejected the veneration of the saints, the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary, the veneration of any of the saints. They thought that Christians ought not to seek the prayers of the saints. So, because of that, they were deeply opposed to the veneration of the Blessed Virgin Mary, to invocations of her for her prayers and intercessions. And because of that opposition, they also recoiled a bit from several of the Church's Marian dogmas. Calvin, for one, acknowledged the theological truth that Jesus was the God-man, and that it could be said with the Council of Chalcedon that Mary was the Mother of God. However, he didn't like to use the phrase. He talks about this. He discourages people from referring to Mary as the Mother of God because he thought that was too wrapped up in Catholic devotion to Mary, and that it would encourage what he considered to be idolatrous ideas about the Blessed Virgin Mary. Of course, all the Reformers believed in the doctrine of the virgin birth. Luther believed in Mary's perpetual virginity, and some of Calvin's followers continued to believe in the doctrine of the perpetual virginity for some centuries, even into the 17th century, that you still find that articulated in Calvinistic circles. because they understood it to be so well attested in the tradition, which is very hard to walk away from that doctrine. You don't find any of the fathers of the church that deny that. Modern Calvinists dispense altogether with the doctrine of perpetual virginity. And, of course, Luther and Calvin both resisted the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. Luther, if memory serves me correct, got a bit weak-kneed when talking about the possibility of the Virgin sinning. So another Catholic doctrine is Mary's impeccability. She did not sin, was incapable of sin. I honestly don't remember. I'd have to go back and look. I do not remember Calvin's particular comments on that doctrine, although I'm suspicious that he denied it. Luther, I think, would not have affirmed sin of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but did not affirm her Immaculate Conception. Of course, they didn't believe in her Assumption. They would have considered that to be an unbiblical doctrine and a later accretion. And they opposed veneration and prayers to the Blessed Virgin Mary. In the Calvinist churches, they removed all images of the saints in religious artwork. The Lutheran churches did not. So you can go in Lutheran churches in Germany today and continue to find images of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but you're not going to find pious faithful praying the rosary in front of such statues.
Right. Maria, thank you so much for your call. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288-EWTN is our phone number, 833-288-3986. Here's a text now from Troy in Houston. How would you explain why be Catholic as opposed to Orthodox when they both, share the Eucharist, etc.?
Sure, thanks. I appreciate the question. Well, it's a matter of wanting to join in full communion with the church that Christ founded and not with a communion that broke away from the church that Christ founded, because Christ desires that his faithful be one. John 17, he prays to the Father, Lord, make those who believe in me to be one, even as you and I are one, so that the world can know that I came forth from God. And so it's a kind of unity that's visible to unbelievers. That's what Jesus says. Let them be one so that the world can see. The visible unity of the church is an intrinsic good towards which we ought to aim. That's unity in doctrine, unity in worship, unity in governance. St. Paul admonishes the Corinthians that they have no disagreements among them whatsoever at all. That's 1 Corinthians 1:10. Do not disagree about anything, he says. We find the model of the unity in governance across the universal church in the 15th chapter of the book of Acts, when the apostles meet in council under the headship of St. Peter to deliberate about a matter of great importance and then send out a ruling that's binding on the universal church. So there's no way to have unity in faith, worship, and governance unless you have a visible head of the church, some source of unity to which all can adhere. Within Orthodoxy itself, not only are the Orthodox positions on papal primacy and ecumenical councils novel and unbiblical, but Orthodoxy itself can't get on the same page, right? There's multiple forms of Orthodox. If you say, I'm going to become Orthodox, well, my question is, well, which kind? Are you going to become a Coptic Orthodox? You become the Monophysites, the non-Chalcedonian Orthodox? You can become an Assyrian Orthodox? You become Byzantine Orthodox? And then if you're Byzantine, you got, a ton of different national ethnic churches, and they can't agree on who's autocephalous and who's not autocephalous and who's under which patriarch, and so they disagree on doctrine, they disagree on spirituality, they disagree on governance and organization, and there's no getting out of that circle because they all claim to be the church. They all claim everybody else is in schism. And you can't appeal to the councils to resolve that controversy because they can't agree on what the councils are.
Okay. Appreciate that. And this is Call to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288-EWTN is our phone number. Let's go to Mike now in Columbus, listening on the Blowtorch there, St. Gabriel Radio, AM 820. Hey, Mike, what's on your mind today?
Hey, good. How's it going, Doctor? Thanks for having this program. I appreciate it.
Sure thing.
Hey, got a question about the rosary. I'm converted, kind of Protestant, I've been Catholic about 11 years. And in full disclosure, I don't do much of the rosary. I know it makes me a bad Catholic. And just sometimes I do feel like it's very rote. So just if you could talk about that, and my little bit of research, it seems like it never really came around for the first few hundred years of the church. It wasn't even around. So it just seems very central right now. And I guess I just haven't gone the bandwagon. If you could talk about that, and then just, I don't know if we could talk about married priests and if that could ever change. I know it could, but what would it take to change that?
All right. I've only got about a minute till the breaks. Let me talk about the rosary, and then we'll talk about married priests. let me put your mind at ease. You're not obligated to pray the rosary to be a good Catholic. St. Augustine, who's one of my favorite saints in all of Catholic history, never heard of the rosary, never prayed it in his life. St. Therese of Lisieux, who's a very modern saint, knew all about the rosary, didn't much take to it. She didn't really jive on that devotion, didn't do much for her. And you're not obligated to pray the rosary. You can go your whole Catholic life from baptism to grave and never pray the rosary once, and you're not a bad Catholic as a result. Now, you cannot neglect devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary in some fashion. Doesn't have to be the rosary. Doesn't even have to be the devotion of the Latin Church. You might investigate devotion to the Theotokos as it's articulated in the Greek Catholic tradition and the Eastern Catholic tradition. They have a different expression of their Marian veneration. So we have to ask the saints for their prayers and the Blessed Virgin Mary preeminently, but doesn't have to be in the form of the rosary.
Right.
If I had more time, which I don't, I would answer the question about how it became very important in the Latin Catholic West, in the devotional tradition, and maybe we can get into that in Married Priest on the other side of the break.
Sounds like a plan. Sit tight there, Mike. We'll come right back to you after this quick break here on Call to Communion. Hey, welcome back. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. 833-288-EWTN is our number. If you would like to ask a question of Dr. David Anders, he's here at 833-288-3986. So before the break there, we were talking with, I believe it was Mike in Ohio, who had a question. We answered the first question, and then there was a second question, David.
Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. He wanted to know how the rosary had become important historically, and we mentioned that you need to have some devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's truly right to bless you, Theotokos, ever blessed, most pure and Mother of our God. That's from the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom. Not a Latin liturgy, it's an Eastern liturgy, but it confesses the faith, the prayer of the Church. It's right to honor the Mother of God. Doesn't have to be through the rosary. Rosary became very popular because it was conceived as a kind of alternative to the Liturgy of the Hours, or the Divine Office, which is the prayer of religious and of monks. That's the recitation of the 150 Psalms on a weekly cycle. That's a full-time job.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And there's always been a desire on the part of the lay faithful in the West to imitate the spirituality of religious and monastics. And the rosary was sort of like the poor man's psalter. It was an easy way to kind of slide into that cycle of 150 prayers after the Benedictine pattern, but in a way that would be accessible to perhaps an illiterate person. And our great love for the Blessed Virgin Mary made it a logical, a reasonable object with which to express our Marian devotion. And of course, there have been innumerable claims to private revelation down through the centuries, purporting to offer great blessings to those who pray the rosary. It's been commended to us by popes and holy people for many centuries. So we advise people to take up the practice. We don't command it. And some people, for one reason or another, find it hard to get going on the rosary. Try another Marian devotion. Just don't leave off devotion to Our Lady. Then there was a question about
married priests,
whether or not the church would ever soften its opposition to married priests. Ever's a long time, and the church has married priests. Church has always had married priests. Church has gone through seasons where she had more or less of them. Hilary of Poitiers, famous early church father, 4th century, from southern Gaul, married man who was elevated to the clerical state and the episcopacy by popular acclaim. So there's two traditions we don't have much of today. Number one, lay people electing bishops by democratic vote, and electing married bishops to boot. All right, but there's precedent for that in the Catholic tradition. We still have married clergy. We've got at least one married priest in the diocese where I live right now, who's comes into the Catholic Church by way of the Anglican ordinariate, and that's the most common reason that we would have married clergy in the Latin Rite. In the Eastern rites of the Catholic Church, there are many more that do have married clergy. Would the Church soften its almost exclusive insistence on celibate clergy and non-married clergy? Impossible for me to say. It's not outside the bounds of possibility. Now, there's good reasons historically why the Church has valued a celibate clergy. Circumstances might change, and there might be good reasons for her to allow exceptions to that rule. But that's kind of above my pay grade.
Time will tell.
Yep.
Indeed. Mike, thank you so much for your call. Call to Communion in progress here on EWTN. Right back to the phones. Let's talk with Andre in Cleveland, listening on AM 1260 The Rock. Hey, Andre, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call. I have a question about I'm a Protestant, so you don't have to try too hard to answer correctly, I guess. I don't like the term Protestant because it sounds not what I am. I'm a non-Catholic. I actually appreciate what the Catholic Church does a lot. But anyways, my question was, what is meant by the fullness of truth?
Sure, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, if we want to follow Christ, we need to know everything that he commands us to do, everything he commands us to believe, everything he wants us to live. In Matthew 28, when he commissioned the apostles, he said, go make disciples and teach them everything I've commanded you. Mm-hmm. We got to have all that. And sometimes in living the deposit of faith, two Christians may disagree on what it means, and they may go in diametrically opposite directions, and it may matter. It may matter a lot. Sometimes it might be a matter of life and death. Is an unborn child a human being? That's a matter of life and death. You get that one wrong, you might end up murdering somebody. There are Christians that part ways over that question as to whether or not an unborn child is a human being. We need an answer to that question. There are many questions in the moral and spiritual life to which we need answers and where our differences are not inessential. We got to have everything that Christ reveals, and we got to have certainty about it. That's what we mean by the fullness of truth. Now, there are Christians who believe that they have all they need in the 66 books of the canon of the Protestant Bible. That's their faith. That's their confession. Through these 66 books, we got all we need. This is the whole shooting match right here. Jesus never said that. Jesus never said, if you want to know the Christian faith with certainty, cling to the 66-book Protestant canon of the Bible. Never says that. Actually, somebody said that. His name was Martin Luther. So it's a human tradition that all we need is these 66 books. And Luther wasn't even sure about 66. Some days he thought it was 65 or fewer. He wasn't sure. He himself wasn't sure. There are Lutherans today that are not sure. Do we have all the right books? Maybe got a couple too many? James, don't know about James. Revelation, not so sure about Revelation. Hebrews, he was kind of squirrely on Hebrews. A few others he had doubts about. The Ethiopians and the Copts, and they take care of that problem. They throw in a couple extras the Catholics don't even have. All right? If memory serves me correct, I believe they throw in the Book of First Clement, the Didache, and a couple others.
Really?
All right, yeah. They have a bigger canon of the Bible even than the Catholic Church does. Well, do we need to know these things or not? Do we need the deuterocanonical texts or not? Do we need the book of James or not? Well, if you don't have revelation from God telling you, you don't have certainty in your act of faith. You don't have certainty in your act of faith. So to have the fullness of the truth, we need all the revelation that Christ gives us, whether by way of written scriptures or by way of oral tradition. You know, Paul talks about that. He says, the tradition I received from the Lord, I hand on to you. And he says, you can't have any disagreement about this. We have no other practice, nor do the churches of God.
Mm-hmm.
Got to have the written scriptures, got to have the oral tradition. And then when there's a matter of disagreement about how to interpret the deposit of faith, I need the tradition of authoritative interpretation conveyed to me by the church that Christ founded when he said, what you bind on earth is bound in heaven, what you loose on earth is loose in heaven. The gates of hell will not prevail against the church. So I need that too. I need the written scriptures, I need the oral tradition, and I need the authoritative history of interpretation so that I don't go off into left or right field someplace I don't need to be.
Sure.
That's what's meant by the fullness of the truth.
There you go. Andre, thank you so much for your call. Glad that you're listening to us on AM 1260, The Rock. This is Call to Communion here on EWTN. We're going now to Jake in Auburn, New York, listening on the great station of the Cross. Hey, Jake, what's on your mind today?
Thanks for taking my call. I had a friend in high school. We got into an argument about the differences of Catholicism and fundamentalism, namely that if you aren't Catholic, you aren't going to heaven, and I didn't know how to respond to it.
Thank you very much. Well, it is not the faith of the Catholic Church that only Catholics go to heaven. That is actually an error that the Church has explicitly rejected for a very long time. The Catholic Church gives us all of the truth and all of the means of grace that we need for our salvation. And if you are Catholic, you have all the truth and all the means of grace you need. If you are not Catholic, you are missing some truth and some means of grace. That doesn't mean that you are necessarily going to hell. It just means that you're limping along on one leg. I sometimes liken it to the man who has an infection and goes to the doctor, and the doctor says, well, here, I'll write you a prescription for antibiotics. He takes the antibiotics, he gets well. Somebody else has the same infection, doesn't go to the doctor. He may also get well, but it's a rougher row to hoe.
Mm-hmm.
It's a harder job of it getting well without the prescription. And that's a weak analogy. The Church teaches us that outside the Catholic Church, there are elements of truth and sanctification. My grandfather was not a Catholic. He was a Baptist. He didn't have the Eucharist. He didn't have confession. He didn't have the holy priesthood. He didn't have the traditions of the Church. He didn't have a lot of stuff that we need. But he squeezed more grace out of his one sacrament, which is baptism. He got more grace out of that one sacrament than I could squeeze out of 7, because he was a man of enormous integrity.
Sure.
And he had a lot of grace in extra sacramental ways. All right, that doesn't mean he wouldn't have been better off as a Catholic, but it does mean just because he was a Baptist doesn't mean he wasn't saved. Fundamentalism means a lot of different things to different people. Fundamentalism was an outshoot of 19th century Protestantism that began as a response to modernism, all right, particularly new modern scientific worldview illustrated by Darwinism and discoveries in geology and so forth, and historical critical study of the Bible. And there were Protestant Christians, especially in North America and Europe, who had begun to disbelieve the literal interpretation of biblical stories. And so Protestant theologians began to insist on a list of so-called fundamentals that would mark them off from more liberal-minded Protestant Christians. Uh-huh. And they identified things like the virgin birth of Christ and the resurrection and his atoning death, a list of fundamentals. That's where the term fundamental comes from. But part and parcel of that fundamentalist movement was also were convictions about a particular approach to the Bible, the way they would read the Bible in a very straightforward, wooden and literalistic way. And then I think the element that you're referring to maybe there was also a tendency to differentiate themselves from people that didn't share their beliefs, sometimes very exclusively, so that if you weren't a member of the fundamentalist sect, you were regarded as a worldly person and in danger of losing your soul. So much so that fundamentalists would disfellowship other fundamentalists for not being hard-nosed enough.
Wow.
Famously, fundamentalists didn't think much of the Reverend Billy Graham, for instance, who was a famous evangelical preacher, but he would cross the aisle, so to speak, and work with anybody that would work with them. And that sort of ecumenism was anathema to the fundamentalist movement.
Wow. Okay, well, there you go. Thank you so much for that. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. The weather here in Birmingham, it is still kind of on the toasty side. We're in the mid-80s today, probably will be for the next week or so. But pretty much everywhere else, it's getting a little bit cooler. You may be thinking about an autumn shrine, like a pilgrimage. Well, think about this. Think about coming to the Shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament. You can visit the final resting place of our foundress, Mother Angelica, and while you're in the area, you can also tour the EWTN campus. It's only an hour away. So start your Catholic pilgrimage today with EWTN. Call 205-271-2966, or you can go to EWTN.com/pilgrimage. You won't be sorry. It is a wonderful time to visit. Actually, any time is a great time to come to the shrine in Hanceville, but we would love to see you anytime. This is Called to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Lisa now in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Hello, Lisa. What's on your mind today?
And I was on my Twitter account. They had posted that naming your guardian angel leaves you open to demonic attack. And my whole kindergarten class, me included, named our guardian angel. Like, I've been calling my guardian angel Michael for like 50 years.
Sure. I appreciate the question. I think we can say with certainty that if we need to know the name of our guardian angel, God will tell us. And the fact that God has not revealed to us the names of our guardian angels probably means we don't need to know them. And angels, the scriptures tell us, are ministering servants sent to serve those who will inherit salvation. Their focus is not on themselves, it's on the human soul led to God safely.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a traditional part of devotion to the guardian angels that we should give them a name. I would be in really bad company if I said that you absolutely cannot do this, because I remember quite clearly that our own foundress, Mother Angelica, was very fond of naming her own guardian angel. I think she named him Fidelis.
I believe that's right.
So I'm not gonna take a position contrary to the august and noble Mother Angelica on this issue. I will say that it is probably unnecessary.
Okay. And that's where we're going to leave it. Lisa, thank you so much for your call. Mary is checking in on Facebook, and she has an interesting thing. Now, you're going to have to help me out on the pronunciation here. What was the heresy of Janhus? Who are we talking about there? Do you know?
Janhus.
Is that Jan Hus?
Oh, John Huss. John Huss. Oh, I was thinking you were spelling out one word for a minute. Yeah.
No.
Oh, absolutely. Sure. John Huss was an Utrechtist.
Whoa.
He was an Utrechtist. He, among other things, that was the heresy of teaching that it was necessary for the laity to commune in both kinds for a valid communion.
Okay.
And the practice in the Latin Church is that the laity generally commune in one kind. They receive the sacred host and not the precious blood of our Lord. And the Bohemian Catholics, led by John Huss, insisted on, among other things, the Utrechtist heresy. They also had other Wycliffite errors. John Wycliffe was an English reformer before the Reformation who taught a number of strange and odd things. For instance, he taught that you could lose your jurisdiction, whether civil or ecclesiastical, through mortal sin. And that's a terribly revolutionary and pernicious doctrine. I mean, imagine if my declaration that you're in mortal sin was sufficient to absolve me of my obligation to obey. Imagine I'm driving down the highway at 65 miles an hour in a 30 zone, and the cop pulls me over, says, "I'm going to give you a ticket." And I go, "I don't think so, buddy. You're in mortal sin. I don't have to listen to you."
Wow.
And that, so Wycliffe had a bunch of strange ideas like that, and Huss was a student of Wycliffe. But he's most famous for having taught the Utrechtist heresy.
Okay, very good. Let's go to Steve now in Anchorage, Alaska, listening on the EWTN app. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Hello, I have a question pertaining to priestly marriage. Now, I know that priests can be married, and somebody stumped me the other day on this when they said, oh, yeah, but pertaining to all the scandals that are going on right now, oh, yeah, but once a priest is married, he has to become celibate. He can no longer have relations with his wife. And that did not sound right to me, but I couldn't find anything in writing that would disprove their statement.
Sure, thank you. Well, there's a different law on this in the West and in the East, and there are differences of opinion on how to read or interpret the law in the West.
Really?
Yes. And so I will tell you that the practice among married clergy in the Latin Rite is not to practice perfect continence, but to have conjugal relation with their wives.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not aware of any jurisdiction in the church, no bishop or ordinary, that is opposing that practice. There are canonists. Ed Peters, who writes the Popular Canon Law blog, In Light of the Law, I know takes a contrary point of view. So we're really getting thick in the weeds here on, the speculative interpretation of provisions in canon law.
Yeah.
So I know that's actually a disputed question about whether or not Latin Rite clergy are obligated to practice perfect continence if they're validly married.
Okay. Steve, thank you for checking in with us today. Glad you're listening in Alaska. That is very cool. Here's a text now from Seth. Seth wants to know, what exactly are demons? Are they the angels that fell with Lucifer? And if not, how did they come to be?
Well, you nailed it.
Ah.
There they are, fallen angels that fell with Lucifer.
Okay. Short and sweet. Here's one now, a text from Tim, who wants to know, if God created everything, then who created God? And how did he come into existence?
Thank you. God didn't create everything. He created everything other than God. He created all of created reality.
All right.
God is not a contingent being. God is not a created being. God is the very act of to be. God is subsistent being that is. Now imagine how absurd it would be to ask the question, how did being come to be? How is it that isness came to exist? How is it that existence came to exist? It's inconceivable to imagine existence itself coming from non-existence causelessly. That there is anything means there's always been something, because nothing comes from nothing. If there were nothing, there would be nothing. Because there's something, something always has been. And that something is God.
Okay. So there we go. We've got time for a little bit longer of a question here. This is from Cheryl. She emailed us, and she says, I have a developmentally disabled 40-year-old son who is currently hospitalized in a psych hospital to adjust his medication. It's been a very difficult time for him. He is truly suffering both mentally and physically. This is his third hospitalization since February. I am currently experiencing leg pain from surgery, tension, anxiety, and grieving for my son. I pray for him almost nonstop, but now I'm starting to doubt my faith. I have been told I should offer my pain and suffering up to God in order to help heal my son. Now, I must admit I don't fully comprehend how this works. Does my pain serve as a penance for him? Please explain how this works. We're both Catholic, but he is not able to go to Mass or confession because of this being development disabled since the age of 4. So what can you say to Cheryl?
So first of all, I want to issue a caution about one thing that you said.
Okay.
If you imagine that your job is to suffer so that your son can be healed, I think that's overreaching a bit, and I think you're setting yourself up for a lot of self-condemnation. It is obvious that every human person is going to experience suffering in life. And we can take at least one of two attitudes towards that. We can fight against it with every ounce of our being, rail against it, become angry at God or ourselves and become distraught. Or we can say, be it done to me according to thy word, not my will but thine be done. Take this cross from me, but not my will but thine be done. I think we're in good company praying that prayer. That was Jesus' prayer.
That's right.
If we do that, if we take the attitude of Christ towards our suffering, take this from me, but not mine, but thy will be done, that surrender to divine providence, that trust in divine providence, is meritorious. It has value. And that value can be applied on behalf of other people. Like St. Paul says, I fill up in my own flesh what's lacking in the sufferings of Christ for the sake of his body, the church. It can be offered as a prayer for your son, but not as a kind of guarantee of the specific outcome that you're looking for. All right, and there's certainly no kind of quantitative proportionality. It's not like if you willingly bear, this X amount of suffering, that God will necessarily respond by healing your son. You don't know what the outcome of the prayer is going to be, and you don't know how God desires to get you or your son to heaven. And I hope very much that both of you experience relief from this suffering in this life. But if it should happen that you don't, it doesn't mean that God has abandoned you, and it doesn't mean that your suffering is without meaning. It may mean that you're way closer to the throne than I am when we get there.
Could be. Cheryl, thank you so much for your email. Here's one from Anonymous. My company of 15 years was recently bought out. The new company has now posted on its website that it recognizes LGBT Pride Month, which was in June. This saddens me, and my knee-jerk reaction is to leave the company and find another job. I don't know if there are places to work that are not like that. Am I supporting this attitude by the company by staying?
Yeah, that's going to be very contextually dependent. I think that's going to hang a lot on your judgment about how much people are going to associate you, and if you're the public face of the company, if you're getting out there in front of it and leading the charge, and their promotion of this agenda is very much wrapped up in the company's published image, so that almost by default, anytime you go out and shake hands with people and represent them, they're going to assume that you're. I mean, that's a prudential judgment that you've got to make based on your intimate relationship to that company. You can participate in evil if your participation is remote and not formal. All right. So if you're trying to bring about an evil result, that's impossible. You can't do that. All right. But if you're not trying to bring about that result, and your participation in some evil act has an evil effect, one that you don't intend, and one in which you are fairly remotely involved, that can be permissible for such reasons like, look, I got to make a living and take care of my family.
Yeah.
On the other hand, even if your participation is not formal participation, but it's very proximate, it's very near to the evil, so that without you, this evil is not going to happen, or you're very, very associated with it, that's a different story. But I can't make that judgment because I'm not close enough to the company or to your involvement to know. You've got to make that, and maybe with your spiritual director.
A little bit of a tough call, isn't it, sometimes?
Sure it is. And you've got to pray about it, too.
Absolutely. Which is always good advice. So thank you, Anonymous, for your very good question, and we'll certainly be keeping you in our prayers as we keep all of our listeners in our prayers, pretty much 24/7, because people listen to us all times of the day or night, whether it's as we're doing the show live at 2 p.m. Eastern, or if you're catching the encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. We are keeping you in our prayers. Dr. David Anders, thank you, my friend.
Thanks, Tom.
By the way, we also have a special encore for you, the best of the week, and that is the one that our producer, Michael Birchfield, pulls out. He listens to all 5 shows, and he says, you know what, Thursday was kind of rocking good. So that's the one we're going to play for you on Sunday at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our great team here, Michael McCall, listen to me, Michael Birchfield, Ryan Penny, Jeff Burson, and me, Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders, thank you so much for listening, and thanks for joining us here on EWTN's Call to Communion. We'll see you tomorrow. God bless.